The queen returned to her chambers and sat down on the sofa. She rubbed at her head, wondering if she had drunk too much. She hadn't. She had taken the same amount she always did. It had to be exhaustion. She had been working too much, worrying about the coming flooding season, and beyond that their neighbours were clearly preparing for war. Too many movements, too little subtlety. Her thoughts returned to the man behind it, and unease followed. She could not tell what he was planning. Her head began to throb. Her heartbeat suddenly quickened. She grabbed her chest, startled by how fast it was racing. She tried to bring it under control, drawing on her mana, but it refused to steady. Her breathing became strained. She pushed her mana through her body, trying to force her heart and lungs to obey. Pain tore through her chest. She lurched forwards and caught herself on the table, her vision swimming. When she tried again to circulate her mana, the pain struck harder, sharp enough to leave her reeling. She understood then. She had been poisoned. It made no sense. Every meal had been checked, every drink tested. There should not have been a way. She forced herself upright and staggered toward the door, trying to call for help, but her voice failed her. Then the door opened. Sir Kyle stepped inside. Relief flashed through her as she reached toward him, asking for help. His expression was cold. He lifted his sword. Blood dripped from the blade. He said it was fortunate he was here, and that he could help her rest in peace. The Queen's eyes widened. Back at the banquet, Lloyd told Javier there was a problem and that they had to leave. As they walked through the halls, Lloyd asked Javier why he had not asked what was going on. Javier told him he had also felt a strange mana presence. He then asked Lloyd what he needed to do. Lloyd told him he had to defeat a swordmaster. Javier asked if he was serious and said he could not possibly defeat a swordmaster. Lloyd told him he only needed him to buy time. Javier said he could give him 1 minute. Lloyd asked for 2. As they continued walking, Javier broke a candelabra from the wall and said he could give him 3. When they reached the Queen's chambers, they saw her servants cut down and lying on the floor. Inside the Queen's chambers, the Queen barely managed to hold off Kyle's attacks. He told her that she was magnificent, that even after being poisoned, she was still able to hold her own against him. The Queen angrily demanded to know why he was doing this. Kyle answered by kicking her in the stomach, sending her to the floor. As he moved in to deliver the final blow, Javier rushed him. Kyle dodged the strike by shifting his head aside, and the two immediately engaged. Kyle fought with his sword, Javier with the broken candlestick. Kyle could not believe what he was seeing. Javier was blocking his strikes with nothing more than a candlestick. Javier activated the skill he had learned before, channeling his mana, so it cut like a chainsaw as it ground against Kyle's blade. Kyle was shocked again as he deflected the attack. He had never seen mana used in that way. Javier pressed forward, attacking again and forcing Kyle back. Lloyd ran to the Queen. She asked what he was doing there. Lloyd covered her mouth and told her to save the chit-chat for later. Her eyes widened at his insolence. He placed his hand on her stomach and used the Asrahan core technique, absorbing the poisoned mana from her body. Across the room, Javier continued holding Kyle off. He saw Kyle begin to conjure his sword aura and realised that once it was complete, he would not stand a chance. He threw the candlestick at Kyle. Kyle deflected it with his sword. The candlestick spun back into Javier's hand as he leapt forward, catching it mid-air and closing the distance. Javier released a mana blast as he swung the candlestick down at Kyle. Kyle could not help but admire Javier's skill. He recognised him as a genius. Then he dodged the attack, drove his fist into Javier's gut, and judged that despite his talent, Javier lacked real combat experience. Kyle followed through with a downward cut. Javier fell back and blocked it, but the blade cut through the candlestick and sliced across his chest. As Lloyd continued absorbing the poison from the Queen, he thought that Javier had to hold on. He was counting on him. If Javier lost, they would all die. Luckily for Javier, the cut was not deep. Kyle moved to finish him, but Javier charged instead. Kyle swung his sword, and Javier slid beneath the strike. Javier shouted for Master Podong. Podong rushed into the room carrying a sword and flung it to Javier. Javier caught it and immediately released another mana blast stronger than the last. Kyle tried to block it. The explosion sent him crashing through the door and into the hallway. Kyle struggled to get back up. It felt like he had been hit by a cannon. He could not understand how Javier was using his mana that way. Another blast came from the room. Kyle dodged and started running down the hall. Javier leapt out after him, giving chase. He used a scatter blast, sending multiple projectiles flying at Kyle. Kyle ran for his life, thinking what a monster Javier was. Lloyd was still absorbing the poison from the Queen, his body visibly being affected by it. The Queen looked up at him, trying to understand how this was possible. He was absorbing her mana, and not just that, he was only drawing in the mana affected by the poison. She asked Lloyd where he had acquired a skill like that. Lloyd told her not to speak. He needed to concentrate. She began to ask for his forgiveness, then stopped herself, remembering who she was. She asked if he had just scolded his queen. Lloyd told her she was mistaken, and that it must be the poison affecting her hearing. He coughed up blood, the effects of absorbing the poison taking hold. The Queen looked at him, wondering why he was doing this, why he was willing to sacrifice himself to save her. Just outside, Javier chased Kyle into the main lobby where the banquet had been held. Javier stopped at the entrance to the hall leading back to the Queen's chambers and told Kyle he would not let him pass. Kyle understood immediately. Javier was holding his position to buy the Queen time. Kyle grinned and shouted to the soldiers, accusing Javier of attempting to assassinate the Queen, ordering them to ready their weapons to protect Her Majesty. The guards rushed forward, spears levelled at Javier. Kyle gave the order to attack. Javier grit his teeth and met them head on, blocking and striking back, sending soldiers flying as they came at him. Kyle watched, noting that these were the Empire's best soldiers, yet Javier was throwing them aside, as if they were nothing. The man was dangerous. If he ever reached Swordmaster status, he could destroy a small nation. That would not happen. Kyle's sword began to glow brighter. He told the soldiers to step aside and walked toward Javier. Javier looked at the blade and recognised that Kyle had finished summoning his sword aura. Kyle attacked. The blow sent Javier flying backward down the hall. Kyle followed, walking toward him as Javier struggled to rise, the force of the strike having shattered his sword and nearly knocked him unconscious. Back in the Queen's chambers, Lloyd finished absorbing the poison. He doubled over and began vomiting a black substance as the Queen called out to him. She told him to gather his mana in his arm, warning that he would die otherwise. Lloyd understood what she intended. In the novel, she had saved herself by cutting off the poisoned limb. He knew she was thinking of doing the same to him. He rejected the idea immediately. Losing an arm would make shoveling difficult. He reached down, picked up a table knife from the floor, and raised it into the air with both hands. He shouted for a mana blast. The knife glowed. The blast erupted upward, crashing through the ceiling, out of the palace, and into the sky. Outside in the halls, Kyle sensed a massive surge of mana and wondered what had caused it. He wondered if it had been Lloyd. Javier dragged himself back to his feet, staggering. Kyle watched him, unable to understand how he was still standing after taking a blow from an aura sword. Javier picked up his broken sword. He reminded himself that he had sworn an oath and that he intended to keep it. His thoughts went back to earlier, just after Lloyd woke from his coma. They were sitting by a campfire at night. Javier told Lloyd that he was useless. Lloyd asked what he meant. Javier told him that he was supposed to protect Lloyd, but he had abandoned his duties to try to save the people of Cremo. When Lloyd refused to fight, Javier told him he was disappointed in Lloyd. Only then did he realise he had relied on Lloyd too much. He apologised for his lack of strength, and for abandoning Lloyd, saying he was unfit to be his knight. Lloyd grinned and told him he understood, then told him not to get too worked up over it. Lloyd then said he would dock his pay for 6 months, still grinning. Javier looked at him and said 3 months. Lloyd laughed and asked if he really thought he was in a position to negotiate. Javier looked into the fire and told Lloyd he swore he would never abandon his duties again, calling it an oath of a knight. Javier then mentioned that he felt Lloyd had reached the level of a triple heart circle and that he would need to get stronger to keep up. Lloyd laughed and said those were big words. After a moment, he picked up a stick and started drawing in the dirt, telling Javier to look. He began explaining the theory of becoming a sword master, but Javier scraped the dirt away with his foot, erasing it. He told Lloyd that this time he needed to find his own way to become stronger and stop relying on Lloyd so much. Standing once more in front of Kyle, Javier resolved that he would become a sword master on his own. He lunged. Kyle answered by driving his sword through Javier, unleashing his sword aura again. He looked at where the blade had pierced him, the shoulder. Kyle told him that he never stopped amazing him. He said Javier should have been torn apart by that attack, but instead he had gathered mana at the point of impact, strengthening his body. He added that he would have liked to see more, but he did not have the time. Now Javier had to die. Kyle drove his sword aura into Javier, the aura surrounding him like a flame. Javier cried out in pain. Then he grabbed Kyle's hand and focused on it. Kyle tried to pull free and demanded to know what he was doing. Javier was analysing his mana, sensing how Kyle was using it as a sword master. Kyle forced him off the blade and threw him away. Javier slammed into the wall and crashed to the ground. Kyle stood over him, unable to sense any mana or breathing. He turned toward the Queen's chambers and thought it was time to take the Queen's head. As he moved, Javier stood up behind him. Kyle turned, startled. Javier told him he could see it now, the mana of a sword master. His broken sword reacted. A glowing green blade formed along it, manifesting his aura sword. Kyle's eyes widened. Was that a sword aura? He had never seen one like it before. Javier's aura expanded, massive, almost like a great sword, energy building within it. Then he released the mana blast toward Kyle. Kyle tried to dodge. He failed. The blast severed his arm and sent him crashing to the ground. The soldiers rushed toward Kyle. Javier told them to step forward if they thought they could defeat a sword master, holding his glowing sword pointed toward the ground. Back in the Queen's chambers, she knelt beside Lloyd as he lay unconscious, shouting for him to open his eyes. She told him that if he could absorb mana, then he could take hers. She called his name again, thinking she could not afford to lose someone so talented, and wondered what she could do. Lloyd slowly opened his eyes. The system informed him that after surviving a fatal poisoning, he had unlocked a new skill tied to his mana heart. He was now immune to all types of poison, and once his mana was depleted, he could supercharge his heart using the mana around him. Lloyd broke into a wide grin. The Queen jolted back at the sight of his expression and punched him in the face. Lloyd looked up at her in surprise and asked why she had done that. Shocked and embarrassed, the Queen told him her body had reacted on its own when she saw his face like that. She then asked if he was all right. Lloyd was still too weak to stand. He told her he needed to save Javier, but he could not move. He realised this was the perfect time to use his new skill. He closed his eyes and began absorbing mana from the surrounding area. The Queen felt it immediately. Mana was being pulled from her as well. She looked around as mana was drawn from the air and even from the furniture. She realised that all of her mana might be taken. She called his name, trying to get his attention, but Lloyd did not hear her. She stopped resisting. Kneeling beside him, she focused and decided he could take all the mana he needed from her. After he had saved her life, it was the least she could do. She stayed at his side, enduring the effect of his skill. After some time, Lloyd opened his eyes. The system informed him that his mana heart skill level had increased and that he had reached the rank of a low-ranking sword expert. It also informed him that he had unlocked a new skill, Frenzy. The Berserker mode could increase his strength, stamina, and reflexes by 200% for 60 seconds once per day. Lloyd sat up. His body felt light, his mana heart felt fully charged. Then his eyes widened as he remembered Javier. He turned to the Queen and said they had to hurry. Only then did he notice how drained she looked. Panic set in as he realised he must have done that to her, thinking the skill was troublesome when others were nearby. The Queen told him she would ask about it later. Right now, they needed to apprehend Kyle. She asked Lloyd if he could carry her. Lloyd told her it would be his honour. He wrapped his coat around her, then carried her out of the room on his back. He raced down the hall, shouting to Javier that he was coming. On his back, the Queen thought that skilled as Javier was, he would not stand a chance against a swordmaster. She tried to focus, forcing herself to recover some of her mana so she could finish Kyle herself. They turned a corner and both of them froze. Javier stood in front of them, his aura sword formed, guarding the entrance. The Queen stared in disbelief. She looked at the glowing blade. Had Javier become a swordmaster? Her gaze shifted to Kyle. He was writhing on the floor, clutching his shoulder where his arm had once been. She climbed down from Lloyd's back and walked toward the guards, ordering them to lower their weapons. She informed them that their commander Kyle had attempted to assassinate her. She told them that the two men standing beside her had saved her life, and ordered the guards to show them proper respect. The guards raised their spears and formed ranks. The Queen then ordered them not to let anyone leave. Every guest would be questioned and investigated. Lloyd quietly asked Javier if he was really a swordmaster now. Javier replied calmly that he supposed so. Lloyd repeated it back to him, asking how he could say that so casually. Javier told him he did not really understand. Things like this tended to happen when Lloyd was around. To him, it was just another step toward getting stronger and protecting Lloyd from future dangers. Lloyd grinned and told him he was something else. The system informed Lloyd that, due to this recent achievement, he had satisfied a hidden condition. Every major achievement he earned granted an honorary title, each one providing bonuses to his abilities. At midnight, on every full moon, he would be awarded AP based on his achievements. The system then listed the titles he had earned so far. Lloyd looked over them. They were strange and not very heroic. One title stood out to him: Your Toast Cremo Lobster. While Lloyd was in the region of Cremo, if he fought an opponent 10 times heavier than himself, his iron stance would activate. The damage he dealt would be doubled, and the damage he received would be halved. Lloyd's eyes widened. It was an enormous boost. He wondered if the other titles were just as useful. He then looked at the AP total and wondered what he could even use it for. That annoying message box had not explained that. The system replied that it had been about to, but perhaps now it should not. Lloyd immediately begged it to tell him as the system mocked him. Javier watched him, thinking there he goes again, and wondered why he was begging this time. The system then told Lloyd that AP could be used to view the ending spoiler. Lloyd's eyes widened as he wondered what that meant. Later, Lloyd returned to the guest room and dropped onto the sofa, exhausted from the recent events. Julian asked if they knew who was behind the attack. Lloyd told him they did not. Even after catching the men who had been exchanging coded messages, a powerful spell prevented any confession spell from working on them. Lloyd thought about how much he wanted to go back home, but leaving was not an option until the investigation ended. He knew no more than anyone else. The book never went into detail about who was truly behind everything. That was probably something meant for the second book. What troubled him was the timing. These events were supposed to happen 3 years from now. He would have to be careful. There were likely more surprises ahead. At least he had gained some useful abilities along the way. As the thought passed, he found himself wondering again about the ending spoiler. Julian asked where Javier was, and whether he was under investigation as well. Lloyd told him Javier had been summoned by the Queen since he had recently become a swordmaster. Julian froze, then shouted in surprise, asking when Javier had become a swordmaster. Lloyd said he thought Julian already knew. Javier had defeated Kyle. It seemed obvious to him. Julian said he assumed they had beaten Kyle with the help of the guards or something like that. Lloyd scoffed and said that even 100 guards stood no chance against a swordmaster. Julian went quiet, finally understanding why Javier had been summoned by the Queen. Javier bowed in the throne room before the Queen. She declared that she had witnessed his unprecedented swordsmanship during the recent events, and that he had conjured a sword aura never seen before. She then told him that the position of Captain of the Royal Guard was now open. She commanded him to stand at her side and take his place as Royal Guard Captain from that day forward. Javier bowed his head. He spoke and asked for Her Majesty's forgiveness. He told her that he was a knight sworn to Baron Frontera, and asked for her understanding that he could not leave his lord's side. After a pause, the Queen told him it was not a request but an order. If he refused, he would be charged with treason. Javier replied that he had one request. He asked to be allowed to say his goodbyes to Baron Frontera. The Queen frowned and said that was an elegant way of saying he would rather die than serve her. Javier told her that he was at her mercy. After a long silence, the Queen said she would respect his wishes. Javier bowed deeply and thanked Her Majesty. He then left the throne room. Waiting outside was Julian. He called out to Javier and asked what had happened inside. Javier smiled and told him that he would always be a knight of the Frontera family. Julian brightly smiled back at him. Still seated on her throne, the Queen smiled quietly and thought to herself that she had no luck with anyone from the Frontera family, it seemed. Later that evening, Lloyd went to a quiet area to check his new skills and titles. He noticed the full moon overhead and realised midnight was close. It was time to receive his AP. The system updated him moments later. 22 AP. He folded his arms, unimpressed, then checked the ending spoiler skill. The cost was 20 AP. He rubbed his hands together in anticipation as the system asked for confirmation, then selected yes. Darkness surrounded him. Then fire appeared around him. He looked around, trying to understand where he was. And recognition followed. The Frontera estate. The buildings were on fire. He did not understand why. He stepped forward and looked down, his eyes narrowing. A body lay on the ground. He broke into a run through the estate, shouting as he went, calling out to anyone who might hear him. He came to a sudden stop. Javier stood ahead. Then Lloyd saw himself. Another version of him was crouched on the ground. In front of that Lloyd lay his mother and father, or what remained of them. The other Lloyd spoke aloud, saying that if only he had arrived a little earlier. Tears flowed as he apologised to his parents for not saving them. Watching, Lloyd gritted his teeth and shouted into the sky, demanding what kind of ending this was. From the sky above, a sound reverberated through the air. He looked up. A dense black swarm filled the sky above him. A swarm of giant locusts.